Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining either in person or online. We're going to go ahead and get started here in just a second. As we are getting underway, I do want to ask if anyone is joining us online, please let me know if you notice any technical issues, if you're having any trouble seeing the shared screen, if you're having any trouble hearing the audio or seeing the video or anything like that, so we can get those problems fixed early on in our session. Everything is now recording, so if there's anything that you would like to go back and watch at a later date, we will have the recording available on our Data and Donuts LibGuide. For everyone that is here in person, I do want to let you know we do have donuts and apples and coffee in the back there if you'd like to grab some. We have plenty of donuts, so feel free to grab a few, definitely enough to go around. All right, well, I think we can get underway. We're a few minutes past the hour. So I am Michael Shensky. I am our head of research data services at the UT Libraries. Glad to have you joining us today for our last Data and Donuts workshop of the semester, which is going to be focusing on managing data with SQL or structured query language. And specifically, we're going to be talking about using structured query language when working with open source relational databases. So that will be our topic for today. All right, so some quick logistics before we jump into content. If you are joining on Zoom, you should be able to turn on the live automated transcription, which hopefully helps if there are any audio issues. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat as we're going along. So my colleagues are here that can help monitor that and let me know if any questions are coming in. For anyone that's here in person, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question at any point. Or we'll also have time for questions at the end between 1 and 1:15 if you'd like to hold maybe a longer, more complex question for them. As a reminder, as with all of our workshops for the Data and Donuts series, we'll be posting the content, both the slides, links to the code that we'll be taking a look at, and links to the recording as well on our Data and Donuts LibGuide. So you should be seeing the link there pop up in a minute in the chat. I will note that the presentation slides have also already been posted on the Data and Donuts LibGuide. So if you go ahead and visit that link that's showing up in the chat, you'll be able to access these slides, and then you'll be able to click on any of the links that we're pulling up during the session. And that'll be really helpful when we're jumping out to a few different resources that we'll be discussing. All right, as I mentioned, this is our last Data and Donuts of the fall semester, and this one is a special one since we do have donuts, and this is also one that is being brought to you by the UT Libraries and the UT Open Source Program Office here on campus. So we're collaborating to bring you this session today since it does have an open source focus to it. But we do have some great events still coming up later this semester after our Data and Donuts series wraps up today. We have AI for generating research code that will take place on November 5th from noon to 1 p.m. That will be a virtual session. So if you're interested in learning how you can use AI tools to help you write research code, this is a great session to join. This one will also be recorded as well. Please go ahead and register if you are interested in attending. And yeah, we'll be taking a look at some code today. So this could be a good introduction maybe to that session if you haven't written code as part of your research before. And another big event we have coming up that I'd like to mention is our GIS Day celebration that will be taking place on Wednesday, November 19th. That will be taking place here in our Scholars Lab in the Perry Castaneda Library from 12 to 5 p.m. So we've got a great series of events lined up. Take a look at the link there that points to our GIS Day landing page. It will provide information about our schedule and the events that we have planned. So a great opportunity to meet other folks here on campus that have an interest in geospatial research and are using GIS in their work. There's also an opportunity to present your map as well. If you're a student, we will be having a map competition, so I would encourage you to submit if you have a map that you'd like to show off. All right, with those things out of the way, we can focus on our workshop content this afternoon. We have a few goals today. So hopefully by the end of this workshop, you feel like you have a pretty solid foundation in the basics of using structured query language, knowing how you would use it, why you would use it, and what that code would look like if you're going to go ahead and start writing some yourself. Hopefully you'll know why it's useful to use structured query language and understand maybe when it's a good fit for the work that you're doing. We'll take a look at some common relational database options, and specifically for this session, focus on open source solutions that fortunately are going to be pretty easy for you to access because they are open source. We'll practice using the DB browser tool and working with a SQLite database. So that's a pretty fun exercise that we'll do in a little bit to get you familiar with the process of starting to interact with a relational database and showing how you can practice with a simple use case. And we'll get some hands-on experience using structured query language with Python. So we're going to jump into a Google Colab notebook. We'll write some simple Python code that will allow us to create a new SQLite database. We'll add some data to it and we'll interact with that data. So you'll have a chance to see how you can use structured query language in conjunction with the programming language. And hopefully you'll have a better understanding of some of the benefits of using open source software in your research. All right, so I think a good place to start here is talking about what a database is and how is this substantively different than maybe managing tabular data in a CSV file or an Excel document. So a database is an organized collection of related data sets with defined data structures. It's different than a spreadsheet that you might be maintaining on your system, which is just a flat file. When we're working with a database, we're usually working with a database management system that's going to allow us to do things like add constraints on the types of data that we are adding to the database to make sure that there are certain validity checks in place. It can also provide features like multi-user access to a database. And so you can have users that have levels of permissions to access certain tables or perform certain operations. There's all kinds of benefits that we'll be highlighting here that will hopefully by the end of the session illustrate to you why a database might be in certain situations a better solution than working with tabular data in a spreadsheet, which I think is significantly more common, but that utility of working with data in a spreadsheet starts to break down as your data gets more complicated, as the volume of data that you're working with starts to grow, and in other situations that we'll be discussing. Today, we're going to be focusing on relational databases specifically, which are great for managing tabular data with defined schemas, but there are other types of databases that you might want to explore as well if you have data that's maybe not a great fit for the relational database. So you might look at document databases where you can manage data in JSON format, and there's flexibility with the schemas you're using. There's graph databases where that's really great for situations where there are a number of relationships between different objects represented in the database that you want to be able to analyze and explore. But again, today we're focusing on relational databases, which are really the more common types of database that you're likely to encounter. So I think it's a good starting point. You eventually want to move on to looking at other database types as well. And hopefully the main thing that you'll get out of this session today is that managing information in a database can be a more efficient and secure method of managing data than managing it in spreadsheets. And so not across all situations. Certainly, if you have a fairly straightforward research scenario, you have a single CSV with 100 records in it, that wouldn't necessitate using some sort of relational database for that type of data. But if you find yourself managing 20 different spreadsheets of related information, you're trying to coordinate access to this data with other members of a research group or a research lab, that's where managing data in spreadsheets would start to become an issue, and a database could be a good solution. So let's talk about some scenarios where you might want to use structured query language and relational databases. As I mentioned already, it can be easier to manage tables in a database than using multiple spreadsheets. We'll see some examples in a minute. But it might also present a learning curve. So hopefully through today's session that will help get you started, and you'll be on your way to getting comfortable using relational databases moving forward. One of the great things about relational databases is that if you have multiple tables of information that you're storing in your database, and there's things that are going to connect them, you can join those records together as necessary for browsing and viewing your records, for doing analysis and visualizations, performing edits. The ability to join related tables together is very powerful, as we'll see through a demonstration a little bit later on. When you are writing structured query language code to carry out operations on a database or to retrieve information from a database, you're writing code that can be referenced again by you in the future, right? So it's very easy to go back the next day, the next week, the next month, and see what exactly you did at a certain point in time, because there's the code that you wrote and executed. You can also share those SQL commands with others. So it's more efficient than if you are carrying out operations on a spreadsheet. How are you tracking what is being done in those operations? Are you writing that down? Are you producing your documentation that describes your process? You're using SQL commands. This can serve as a form of documentation as well, while you're also carrying out your work, as long as you're maintaining those SQL commands, and that's one of the benefits of using structured query language in conjunction with scripted processes. So we'll get some experience with that today. So using Python, for instance, if you're running things locally on your machine, or PHP can be a great solution used in conjunction with relational databases that are looking to set up a data-driven website. If you wanted to create a blog, for instance, you could use PHP to retrieve information about your blog entries that are stored in a database and pull that into your web page and allow people to very easily navigate through all of your blog posts. So that's a common way that blogs are set up, is using a language like PHP and a relational database on the back end. Structured query language has many applications. I just mentioned data-driven web design, geographic information system data management. We'll take a look at QGIS today, so you'll get a little bit of experience with that. And finally, I'll say that relational database management systems can store massive amounts of data and provide fantastic granular control over data access. So if you are working in a really complex scenario where you are trying to manage who has access to data in the database and who has permissions to perform certain operations or to see certain data, you can set that up using a relational database management system. All right, and so just to kind of drive this point home about the limitations of working with spreadsheets in more advanced research scenarios or challenging research scenarios. If we look at Microsoft's documentation that describes the limits of Excel and what it can handle, it is only able to support a little over 1 million rows of data in a single Excel spreadsheet. That's a lot, and certainly, many folks on campus might not ever even be in a research situation where you need to store over 1 million records in an Excel spreadsheet. But if you ever find yourself in that situation, right, it's good to know what you would turn to as a good viable solution. And so if we look at, this is just using SQLite as an example, which is a very simple relational database that you can manage locally on your system. The maximum database size is 281 terabytes. Very unlikely that you would ever have 281 terabytes of data to work with. That's a pretty extreme amount. We look at the maximum number of rows in a table, we're talking over 18 quintillion rows potentially that could technically be stored there, with the ability to have over 2,000 columns per table. So it's pretty amazing just how significant that difference in capacity is. Now, I've highlighted the benefits here of why you might want to work with a relational database in certain situations, but I think it's helpful for us to start to get a better understanding of what it is that we're talking about here. So in a relational database, all of your data is stored in tables. So you're already used to working with data in CSV format or XLSX format. You have a lot of experience working with spreadsheets. This will seem pretty familiar to you. So you can see two examples here of tables that might exist in a database. I'm going to use a lot of tree examples because that was one of the first things that I really focused on in my career working with relational databases. But we can see we have information about trees in a tree table. Here we have an oak tree and an ash tree. They exist in a table about the trees that maybe are managed by our city. And over here, we have a separate table that describes all the maintenance operations that are being performed on trees in our city. So when are they trimmed? When are they fertilized? When is a dead tree removed? And there are ways to link these two tables together using what we would call a foreign key and a primary key. So here, our primary key, the tree ID describes the tree in the tree table. And over here, we have a table about maintenance operations, again, trimming, fertilizing, removing. And there we see the tree ID, which these are not, each row is not an information about a tree, it's an information about a maintenance operation. So this would be referred to as the foreign key. But you can see tree number 1 over here, this oak tree might have had 2 different operations performed on it. It was trimmed twice in 2020 and again in 2021. And the primary and foreign key allow us to link these records together in our relational database. So it's going to allow us to pull up related records as we need to carry out analysis to understand what's happening with our data. So each row in the database contains information about a particular record. Again, in the top table that we see represented there, each row represents a single tree. In the second table, a little bit lower down, each record represents a maintenance operation performed on a tree. Each column of information refers to a specific attribute. So again, we see things like the species of the tree, what condition is it in, what date was it planted, for the maintenance operation, what type of work was performed. So we have consistency there. Everything in that column is a certain category of information, a specific type of attribute. As I've already mentioned, rows in one table can be joined to related rows in another table. So using a join operation, which we'll practice a little bit later on, we can bring these two things together so that we see all of the relevant information tied together. So if I wanted to know about these two trimming operations in the maintenance table, but I wanted to see some information about the tree that was trimmed, I could join these tables together and see the information about that being an oak tree that's in good condition and everything else that might be associated with that particular tree. So that can help me understand maybe why those maintenance operations were performed at that particular date. And when we're working with data in relational databases, if we organize it properly, we can normalize it to avoid redundant storage of information across multiple tables. So when you're just starting out working with relational databases, it might seem like a natural tendency to want to fill in all of the information we know about these maintenance operations, for instance, right? Technically, we could have another column here that tells us the species of the tree, that tells us the condition that the tree is in, that tells us the date it was planted, right? But we're going to have a lot of redundant information in that table if we do that. So as an example, if we look at the first two maintenance records, we see those both pertain to tree ID number 1. So we would have the same information in additional columns over here if we added them. So we would see oak repeated again, condition repeated again, planting date repeated again. And when we're talking about really, really large databases, all of that redundant information can add up and slow down performance and make it harder for you to browse through the data that you want to find. And so it's actually beneficial to split up that data in certain cases, and you can always join the information back together when you need to using the primary and foreign key. Now, there are two major different types of database implementation that you might set up depending on your scenario. So the scenario we'll really be focusing on today is you using a local database on your file system to manage data effectively. So there are multiple ways that you might interact with data that is stored locally on your system in a relational database. So for our example today, we'll be using a SQLite database. And we're going to be using the DB browser tool to interact with it. But you could also write Python scripts that retrieve information from your database or add information to your database. And you might have other applications as well. Also take a look at QGIS and how it can connect to a relational database. So if you're operating in this way, you might be a researcher working independently, and you are just finding that using a relational database is the best way for you to independently manage your data while working alone. In a more advanced scenario, you might be in a situation where you need to collaborate with a colleague on managing the data in a relational database. And in that scenario, you would set up your relational database on a server so that you and your colleague could connect to it as necessary to retrieve information for analysis, or you could connect to the database to edit data, whatever you needed to do. So we can see here, and you're going to see these cylinder symbols a lot. So a single gray cylinder is a symbol of a single relational database. And here on our system, maybe we have a single database for our research project. If we're using a server, we might have a situation where we have multiple databases all being managed by a relational database management system. So each of these, you can think of them as maybe being for different projects, perhaps. And this is really useful in situations, again, where you need to control who has access to the database, and you need to coordinate on managing the data in the database. So that would be difficult to do if the data only exists on your computer, right? We don't want to make copies of a database if we're collaborating. We want to have a single source of truth, and that's going to be relatively easy to maintain if we're using this client-server model. So each of the people participating in the research would be working on their own computers, which would be the client. And then a server would be used where the data is stored, and that's what people connect to interact with the data. All right, so all of that brings us to now talking about structured query language. So you might hear structured query language more colloquially referred to as SQL, right? The acronym that's commonly utilized, and sometimes you might hear it referred to as SQL. You'll probably notice me using both interchangeably today, depending on the context in which I'm discussing it. So SQL, or structured query language, is a standardized syntax for interacting with relational databases. It is an amazing thing that regardless of what relational database we happen to be using, and we'll see some examples of different options here in a minute, we can count on structured query language being consistently interpreted across all of them. I will say there are some very limited exceptions where if you're using like certain proprietary databases, they might have some additional things that they allow their database to do. But by and large, the syntax here is very standardized. So it does make it easy to transition from one database to another in most cases. Structured query language can be used with database management software to control what is happening in your database or to request information from the database. And that can be used with scripts written in other languages. So today, we'll see Python and structured query language used together to modify information in a database and retrieve information from a database. And we can use structured query language for all kinds of things. It's not just for retrieving information, like might be implied in the word query there, but we can write SQL code that creates new databases and tables, so sends the information about how those should be created to our relational database management system. As you might expect, we can use it for querying data or retrieving data that's stored in the database. So we can pull that in and get it ready for use in analysis or visualization. We can update data that's there. We can join data and related tables together. We can set constraints that put limits on what can go into certain fields in a database. So that can help us maintain the validity of the information that we're storing. We can define triggers and views. So maybe we want to just, in some instances, see a partial view of what's in a database. A view is kind of like a stored query in a way. And define triggers. So when one thing changes in a database, that can set off another process that also happens in the database. We can create indices that make it faster to retrieve information, and we can manage those primary and foreign keys that are so important for working with related tables. And so we can see here a very, very simple example of a query written in structured query language. We can see certain words are highlighted in all caps and in blue. Those are key parts of the syntax. So those are things that are defined as part of the SQL syntax. So the word select, we'll see that a lot today. The asterisk here means all or everything. It's a wildcard character. From, this is describing what table we are pulling information from. You'll notice the word customers here is not in blue, and that's because that's the name of a table, right? So this is not part of the structured query language syntax. If we were using this in a research scenario, we're probably not storing information about customers. This might be called from experiments or from some other table that we're maintaining in our database, where this is putting a condition on the data that's retrieved. And so in this situation, they are only interested in retrieving the information associated with customer ID #1. So that's limiting the information that's being pulled from the database with this query. So why might folks use relational databases? They are used in a wide variety of situations, very commonly utilized by businesses and organizations to maintain things like business records related to sales, marketing, where information about employees is stored in a relational database. It can be used, as I mentioned earlier, to build data-driven websites that can make the whole process of maintaining a complex website much, much easier. It can be used to embed data within mobile applications. If you're writing an app like an Android app, you can have a SQLite database that stores the data for your app so that it can retrieve it as necessary and pull it into the user interface. And as we'll be focusing on today, it can be really useful in situations where you were looking to manage research data. And I'll pause for a second here in case there's any questions and let everyone take a look at this list of different data sets that have been published to major generalist data repositories. In each of these cases, these researchers have decided to publish their data in a SQLite database, which is one of the things we'll be taking a look at here in just a minute. So I want you to think about the variety of the projects represented here. We have a project looking at Kickstarter information, right? The Kickstarter platform being analyzed. We have projects that are focused on science itself. So images of the archive, reconfiguring large scientific image databases and code contribution and credit in science. We have studies about birds, the common, I don't even know how to say the name of that bird, guillemot, in the Baltic Sea. So folks studying birds are using SQLite databases to record that information. We have studies of the Mercado Libre site and the different products that are for sale on it. Spectral data is being managed here as well for this hydrological study. So all kinds of different use cases. Again, I think it shows the fact that structured query language and relational databases can be useful to researchers in a variety of fields. Are there any questions so far, Brett? All right. One of the other things you'll notice if you click on any of these DOI links is that these databases. Okay.
Someone asked, I understood what you said about avoiding redundant columns in relational databases, but why call them normalization?
Why call it normalization? Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know actually the history of the term and where that comes from. But databases where an effort has been made to avoid that storage of that redundant information are referred to as normalized databases. And the process of doing that, of removing that redundancy in cases where that might exist in a database, is referred to as normalization. So one of the other things, again, that I just want to draw attention to is that if you click on any of these links and actually visit these pages in these repositories where these data sets are available from, you'll notice they are all quite large, most of them at least. Only the spectral library one is relatively small. And so again, I think that highlights the utility of using structured query language and relational databases in a situation where, again, you want to manage relationships between tables carefully, but also in situations where you just have a large number of records that it makes sense to manage in a tabular format. All right, so we are going to have our first example right now. I'm going to just go ahead and show how structured query language can be useful to you, even if you are not necessarily in a situation where you're typically working with a relational database, or maybe you're not even setting up a relational database of your own. Maybe you're downloading one that other researchers have shared through a data repository, like the examples I mentioned just a minute ago. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to open an application called QGIS. And so for this one, it takes a few minutes to set up and install QGIS. So I don't know, this is one where it would make sense to follow along because of our limits on time today. But just I want to give you an example of how you can utilize structured query language within a major open source application that is commonly used in research. And that's exactly what QGIS is. So QGIS is the most widely utilized open source geographic information systems tool. It's widely utilized by scientists and researchers all over the world. And if I download a database, like any of those that I just mentioned a moment ago, and I go into QGIS, you'll notice at the very top, and it's probably going to be very small for those of you in the audience and perhaps for those of you online as well, but if you look in the very top left of the application, you'll notice the menu up there. We have project, edit, view, layer, settings, many things that you might expect in an application like this. But one of the options you can click on up there is called database. And if you click on that, you'll see that there's a very short drop-down menu with only a single option, and that pulls up DB Manager. And in this DB Manager, it will show you that you can connect to different types of databases. So you can connect to a local data set, like a geo package that's on your system. You can connect to an Oracle database, that's a proprietary relational database management system. You can connect to a PostgIS database. So that's a database that would use PostgreSQL for managing spatial data. And you can also connect to a SQLite database. So that is a SQLite database that is designed to hold geospatial information. So here I just have an example of a relational database, again, another research-focused relational database that I had downloaded a couple of days ago. And if I make a connection to it, you'll see that I can see this large number of tables in this very well-normalized database. And I can pull up information about each of them. I can see the table here, the information that's contained in there. And you can import layers. So if I go down here to the place codes, where we have some geospatial information, X coordinates and Y coordinates, I can import that layer into my database, or into the application for use in mapping operations. And so in this case, let's see, I downloaded this a couple of days ago, so to download it here right now. Let's see. I'll show you very quickly the database that it is, and I'll have to re-download it.
Michael, can I ask you a question while you're doing that? I might have just missed this, but for SQLite, can you have a SQLite database that just happens to have XY coordinates involved in it? Or is there some specific format that you've got to follow that's not the same as a SQLite database?
That's a good question, and actually I don't know the answer to that offhand, not having really worked much with spatial-light databases in particular. But in this example, I mean, certainly with an application like QGIS, it shouldn't be hard to do any sort of transition between common formats. And so if you ever needed to move data from one format to another, knowing which application to use, again, Python would also make it easy to switch between formats. But I actually don't know offhand the additional functionality that exists in a spatial-light database that does make it distinct from the SQLite database. So again, I mean, many of these things will be relatively easy to look up as well. And so one of the things that I will be pointing to at the end of our talk today are links to resources that can be helpful if you have additional questions like that. But yeah, that's a fantastic question.
One more in the chat if you want to take it, Michael.
Sure.
Is relational database strictly defined based on some technical software or something so that SQL as a specific language can be used on them? What's a database management software? Did all such software decide to use SQL for convenience? And can someone, really anyone, invent database software that doesn't use SQL?
Certainly, yeah, there are, as an example, I'll just throw out Neo4j as a graph database where they have their own query language they call Cypher. So anyone could write, the software to be a new type of database that they have created, and it doesn't need to use the SQL standard. The issue you would run into if you, let's say, wanted to create your own relational database using a different standard is that it would be very hard to drive adoption because people would have to learn a new language to be able to do that. So in some cases, like with Neo4j, the graph database, because graph databases are significantly different than relational databases, it made sense maybe to have a new language that people would be more willing to learn because of the additional functionality it provides in this very specific use case with data in the graph database. But yeah, that's a great question. So I mean, it's a standard that it makes sense for any new creators of a relational database to adopt because everyone is already going to know how to write SQL code. There's all kinds of documentation that is available out there, and folks would be able to adopt use of your database relatively quickly and efficiently because they should already be familiar with it. Good question.
You want to take a follow-up on that one?
Sure.
And so conceptually, then what exactly is a relational database? For example, if I have two CSVs about tree trimming in that case, and they're obviously related to each other, can someone claim that's a relational database? Does that mean that there's like shared columns, or is that about what they cover as in terms of like related topics as a database?
Yeah, so that wouldn't be considered a database because there isn't anything that is managing them together, right? And so when we're talking about relational databases, we have a database management system that can execute the queries that we run against it in order to retrieve information from the databases that it is being used to control. So that would be a distinction there. And again, if you have two different spreadsheets, yes, they might have what you could regard as a primary and a foreign key, but what is actually linking those things together? What is enforcing any constraints that you might want to put on the structure of the data there? It's missing the relational database management system component. All right, so my apologies here with not getting this data to load here, but actually maybe it's an issue because I had already loaded it previously. So if we open this attribute table here, that's probably what it is, that it's already in here. But this is the data being pulled in from the SQLite database. And we can see we have the XY coordinates. And so using QGIS, not going to take time to do it now, but we could also map those coordinates and see them displayed on the map. So we jump back to the slides. All right, so again, one of the things that we're really focusing on today is the difference between commercial solutions and open source solutions. So when you're working with a commercial product, The code that has been written for that database software is unlikely to be shared in most cases because it's a intellectual property owned by the company, right? It's something that's proprietary that they want to restrict access to because they are selling it as a product. That's how they're making their money. So we look at the #1 relational database according to dbengines.com, which tracks the popularity of different database options. We can see that Oracle is by a significant margin the most popular relational database in the world. And it is one that is offered by Oracle Corporation, which its flagship product is their database. We can see, though, the second most popular is MySQL. MySQL is an open source relational database that is very widely utilized and very popular in situations like web design and web development. Following that, we have Microsoft SQL Server. Again, now I'm using SQL instead of SQL, which is kind of commonly how that's referred to. Microsoft SQL Server is Microsoft's flagship relational database product. Behind that, we have PostgreSQL, which is one of the top most popular open source relational database software options. And then beyond that, MongoDB, this is the first one that we have on this list of popular databases that is not a relational database, that is a document database. So it's substantively different. If you wanted to work with MongoDB, it is not the same as working with a relational database, although it is an open source option that you can utilize. So there's a variety of popular open source and proprietary options to choose from. So what is open source software? Why would you want to maybe consider using an open source option? One of the main things that might attract you to that is the fact that it is going to be free for you to utilize. So you don't have to worry about licensing or paying for open source software. Typically, in some of those options like MongoDB, you can pay for their cloud service as an example, because there's a company behind that open source product. But if you're looking to adopt open source software, you are typically able to use a community version locally on your system, and you can set it up in any way that you'd like. It provides the freedom to modify the code because you can see the code base. If you feel comfortable, creating your own software or modifying software, you have the ability to do that. You can check and see how that code is operating, so you can make sure there aren't bugs in the code. You could look for things to understand what is happening behind the scenes to make sure that any analysis you're doing would be valid. So that can be a benefit in a research scenario. And if you're interested in kind of understanding where this source code might be available from, typically you go to a place like GitHub to see the code base for a project like MongoDB or PostgreSQL or MySQL or MariaDB, which is an offshoot of MySQL. And typically these open source applications are going to be shared under a software license that defines how you can use the software. And so there are really two major types of licenses that are out there. One would be a permissive license that basically says you can use it for just about any purpose, and very, very minimal requirements on your part. So that means you could even use an open source product in a commercial application. In other situations, it might be a copyleft license that says, yes, you can have access to the source code, you can build off of it, but anything you build from this also has to be open source. So really, trying to push others to continue supporting the open source ecosystem. Here we can see a comparison of the top 5 most popular commercial databases versus the top 5 most popular open source databases. And just really quickly, I'm going to jump over to this website because I think it's got some really interesting visualizations that can make it easier to understand here just how popular open source relational databases are, or databases in general are, compared to commercial databases. So it's about a 50-50 split here in terms of the number of major databases that are being tracked by this website. The overall popularity, so how widely are these utilized, it's almost exactly 50-50. So this isn't the case in every industry where we would see such a large portion of users relying on open source software, but it is very common in regard to databases. And we can see that really interesting trend over time here that, going back 10 years or so, we see that commercial databases were substantially more popular than open source databases, but there has been a pretty clear trend over the last 10 years where open source licensed databases are now almost exactly as popular as commercial options. So pretty interesting to see the plateau here as well, though. But just want to emphasize that there are really good options on both sides. And it really is something where if you're using an open source product in this situation, it can be a very robust solution. All right, so I want to talk about some specific options here. We've already talked a bit about SQLite. I've mentioned MySQL, PostgreSQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle. I want to highlight here that if you are a staff member or a faculty member, you have access to our Enterprise Technology Database Management Service. That allows you to create a MySQL database, a Microsoft SQL Server database, or an Oracle database that lives on our servers here on campus, and that is centrally funded. So that would allow you to support up to 10 gigabytes of data storage. So for faculty and staff, this can be really helpful for research scenarios where you might benefit from setting up a relational database management system. So of those available options that are supported by our enterprise technology team, MySQL is the only open source option that they support. I'll just throw that out there. That PostgreSQL, for instance, is not one of the supported options. But if you wanted to set up your own PostgreSQL database, you could. All right. At this point, I want to have folks jump over to take a look at SQLitebrowser.org. So if you go ahead and go over to that, you'll see that this is going to take you to the download page for an application called DB Browser. It is also an open source tool. And if you're working on a Windows machine here, likely they probably want the 64-bit version. It's also supported for Mac and Linux machines. So any computer that you're on, you should be able to find the right one here. Just want to make sure you select the right download if you don't already have this application on your computer. And I'm going to go ahead and pull it up on mine. And we're going to take a look at this tool. So this is DB Browser for SQLite. And I've already got something loaded in here, but I'm going to go ahead and create new database. So you can go ahead and do the same. And I'll just call this new example. Start my old one here. So it's asking me to create a table right away. So it's not going to want me to have just a completely empty database. So I'm going to call this first table example table, and it's going to want me to add a field there. And so I can say example ID. We're not really going to work much in this table. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And open that database. Okay, so there it is. So I see I have one table in here, and I can create as many tables as I want. I can create another one and give it any name that I want. But one of the other things I want to highlight for you is if you're already used to working in data in CSV format, you already have data that might be in CSV format or in another spreadsheet or tabular data format on your system, and you're interested in testing, loading it into a relational database like this one, that's pretty easy to do using if you go to File and Import import table from CSV, you can create a new table from the CSV file. So for this example, we're going to do a little demo. If you click on this link here, hopefully everyone's following along in the slides. And you can also just watch too if you're not interested in trying to keep up here, since we are going to move kind of fast. You're going to download a data set that is information from a tree inventory that was carried out in Portland, Oregon. So if you download that, you will see it in your downloads folder. It will be called parkstreeinventory.csv. All right, so here it is in Excel, and we can see this is a pretty large number of records. It's not over 1 million or anything, so we're not really stretching the limits of what Excel can handle. But we're talking tens of thousands of trees that are recorded in this spreadsheet. We can see we have a pretty significant number of columns as well. That's telling us information about different measurements of these trees, the species of the tree, a lot of really amazing information here, including things like how much carbon is stored in the tree. So it's telling us about the benefits of these trees as well. It's telling us whether it's a native tree or an introduced tree, giving us height measurements, the condition of the tree, all that stuff that we might be interested in is included here in the database, including the X and Y coordinates as well. So yeah, a lot of great information here in the CSV file. But let's say we want to bring this into a relational database, so we can start to track things like I was mentioning earlier. If you were maintaining these trees, right, you might want to have a separate table with information about maintenance on the trees. Yes.
When you import a CSV file, how do you tell it that your table has headers?
So we'll see that process here in just a second. So this, yeah, if we're looking in Excel, we do see that it has, so when you say headers, you mean just the standard header row or additional?
Titles at the top.
Yeah.
Is it just, I imported one and it brought them in as rows.
Oh,
This is the
interesting.
part where it wanted to, where it was gonna ask me if I had headers for my table or not.
Okay, so let's go through the process together here. So I'm gonna go down to import table from CSV file, and over to my downloads. There it is, select. So there is a checkbox here. Says column names in the first line. So if you have more than, you know, just the column headers, there, some CSVs, for instance, you might download online, they might not be structured well, and so you might need to delete some of the additional information that might be at the top to get it where that top row is just the headers. And so, yeah, you want to make sure that's.
When I'm on the DB browser, it's not giving me the option to do table from CSV file.
So it's grayed out, like you can
Yeah.
pull up the menu, but it won't let you select it. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure why that would be. Are you on a Mac or a PC?
I'm on a Mac.
Okay. Yeah, that's strange. I don't know that I've ever seen that issue.
I'm getting the same issue.
Okay, interesting. It might, are you also on a Mac?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. I wonder if it might be the way that it was installed in the security settings on your computer, maybe restricting it from doing certain things. So yeah, I'd be glad to stick around afterwards and take a look at that, see what might be causing that. But yeah, for the sake of time, I quickly want to get into some of the things you can do here in DB browser. So if you move over to browse data, it will allow you to select, you know, which table in your database you want to browse. This will take a second, but here we go. Now I can browse through all of the data about these trees within DB browser instead of Microsoft Excel. And so now I'm going to write a very common query here. So this is kind of like the most basic query that you would see. Select all from, and then I'm going to put the name of the table, which is Parks Tree Inventory. And if I run that, it's going to give me everything in the table, right? So I didn't put any filters or restrictions on this. I just said select asterisk is the wildcard. That means everything. So select everything from this table. But I maybe want to say select all from this where the species, or actually let's do genus.
Where did you get the selection pull down for your table?
Oh, that, so let me back here. So here, if you start typing the name of the table, it will. Oh, you mean in the browse data? Sorry, yeah, so for browse.
No, actually in the execute SQL.
Okay, so
If it was.
yeah, so it will, if you start typing, give you a list of the ones. So you just want to know at least, you know, part of the name of it. And then it should pop up here. Okay, so let's put a filter on this. So where is the keyword that we're going to use when we're writing SQL code that is going to allow us to put a filter on a query? So here I want to say where the genus equals, and let's say I want to look for fir trees. So that's babies. And I'm going to run that. And there we go. So this is only information about the fir trees that exist in this Portland tree inventory. Maybe I want to see information only about pine trees. So I look only for the genus Pinus. I run that again, and now it's only information about pine trees. Maybe I want to know how many of each of these types of trees exist in the city. So I'm going to use the count method in SQL. And so I'm going to say select the count of everything from the Parks tree inventory where the genus equals Pinus. I'm going to run that, and there's 994 pine trees. And maybe I want to compare that to another genus. So let's take a look and see if there's any pecan or hickory trees, Caria. Only 9, right? Not surprising, you know, Portland is not known for pecan trees. So this is one way that you can, you know, start to quickly retrieve information from a very large data set using structured query language. Just one final example I'll do here is going to be a mathematical operation. So let me look back at the data, and maybe I want to find the average tree height. So here, instead of doing count, I'm going to say AVG for average.
Michael, are there any rules about when you have to add quotation marks around certain things in the query?
Yes, yeah. So if you are not, again, this is all defined in the SQL syntax, you do want to make sure that for your field names and for your you know, values that you are putting quotation marks around those, else you can get error messages. So it's just like any other programming language where you know, if you're not adhering to the defined syntax, you know, you're going to have an issue with interpreting the code that you've written. So here, just as an example, if I want to look at the average height of a pecan tree in Portland, we can see it's 70, and we'd have to look at the unit of measurement there. That's probably feet. And if we shift it back to fir trees and see what the average height of a fir tree is in Portland, it's slightly lower, about 68. So those are just some examples of the ways that you can work with data in a database browser. No, we are running a little low on the, so I do want to move on, but if you're interested in sticking around, we'll be glad to you know, talk with you more about the DB browser tool. All right, and so this next example, we're going to look at using Python and SQL together, and we're going to jump into a Google Colab notebook in order to do that.
Michael, can I ask you one question before you move to that? So I was thinking about selecting things using SQL, and the first thing I ran into was I don't remember what the values of my fields were. So is there a way, you know, in QGIS or ArcGIS, if you have the query form, you can say like show all of the values and decide which value. Is there anything that you can use to do that in DB browser?
Oh, in DB browser. That is a good question. Yeah, certainly it's something that I, you know, rely on. Yeah, in GIS tools. And yeah, I'm not in DB browser often enough to know, I guess offhand, if there is a way to see that like quick list of values. But that is a good question. Yeah, something I'll have to look into. Because yeah, certainly it's useful in other GUI tools like GSL. Yeah, and what we're going to transition to here now with the last few minutes, I'd say is more typical of how I might use SQL, because there are, I think, certain advantages to using a programmatic approach for, you know, structuring your queries, running those in a systematic way, and also then taking the information that you might pull from your database and then pulling it into other operations for analysis or visualization. Okay, so really quickly, Google Colab that we're going to use here in just a second is a Jupyter notebook interface that runs on Google's cloud. And so it allows us to write Python code in a Jupyter notebook where we can run it. You don't even need to have Python installed on your system to be able to do this. So it's a fantastic way to learn and get comfortable writing Python code and to get familiar with the Jupyter notebook interface. For those of you that have not used Python before, again, focusing on open source today, it is an open source interpreted programming language. It's cross-platform compatible, so whether you're on a Mac, Windows PC, or a Linux computer, you would be able to use Python. It is extensively utilized in a wide variety of fields, very popular in academia. There's a very large ecosystem of open source packages that you can draw from. It's really a fantastic tool for anything that you might want to do with research data. So we'll get some experience with it here in just a minute. So we're going to jump over to a Colab notebook. You click on the link here under the Python and SQL demo slide. And specifically, we're going to look at some things. We're going to import required packages. We're going to create a new SQLite database. We'll create some new tables in the database. We'll add some records that we'll be creating to go into that table. We'll query those records, and then we'll practice joining tables together based on a primary and foreign key. All right, so we jump over to that. Okay, so because of us, only having about 6 minutes here to go through this demo, which I think is enough time, I'm not gonna have the ability to fully explain how things are set up in the Jupyter Notebook environment or give a full introduction to the syntax of Python, which is, a whole topic into itself. I will mention that we do have some really fantastic resources also available on our Data and Donuts website, where we've provided very thorough introductions to Python in the past, and so you can consult those materials if you're interested in an intro to just Python. But today I'll just walk you through the different steps in this notebook. What we're going to do in this first code cell up here, so these different blocks of code we refer to as cells. I do want to highlight that when we are looking at these statements, import SQLite 3, import OS, this is Python code. This is not SQL code. And when I click the play button here, it's going to send the instructions to the Python interpreter that's running on Google's cloud server here to execute that code. So right now it's importing some libraries of Python code that are written to facilitate working with SQLite databases. So that's what that SQLite 3 package is going to allow us to do. So that's going to be really important for all the things that we're going to want to do later on in this code. So let's see, let me go ahead and refresh my page here because it shouldn't take that long to import those packages. It might have just timed out. Okay, there we go. So actually, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see with being small. After I click that play button, you should see a green check mark over there on the left, and that's going to tell you that that code ran successfully. Now, as we're going through here, we're going to look at some canned examples that I've written specifically for this workshop. If you want to experiment with this and modify it and write your own code, that's a great way to get more comfortable with this. What I would encourage you to do is make a copy of this in your own Google Drive folder so that you can edit it. So yeah, you can run it, what I have here, but if you want to modify it in your own way, then you would want to save a copy in Drive. So I'd highly encourage you to do that. That will also allow you to easily come back to this at any point in the future if you do want to practice Python or practice writing additional SQL code. Okay, the next block here is going to delete a SQLite database code already exists. So it's going to check to see if we already created a database before when running this code. And anything that we create is going to get saved here temporarily in our Google Drive space for this notebook. So we would see it pop up here. So that deletes it if it exists. And now this next bit is really interesting. I'm going to go ahead and run it. And you can see it's just almost instantaneous how fast this gets executed. This is going to create a new SQLite database. So it's going to use the SQLite 3 library, and it's going to use the connect method. We're going to plug in the name of the database we want to create. So we're going to open it and assign that database connection to the variable called com, short for connection, and then we're immediately going to close it. So whenever you open a database connection, you want to make sure you close it as well. So in this case, we're just opening and closing it so you can practice that process. And you'll notice here, this wasn't here just a minute ago, right? We created that example.db file by running that block of code. All right. So next, we now have this empty database. I'm going to run a block of code that is going to use Python to execute SQL queries in order to create things within the new database. So here, the first thing I'm going to do is reestablish the connection. It's not going to recreate the database because the database already exists now. It's just going to connect to it. I'm going to establish a cursor. A cursor is something that allows you to go in and interact with the database. So we need to create our cursor. So this is very common. That term is very common whenever you're interacting with a database using a scripted approach like this. And the first thing we're going to do in our database is we're going to execute a SQL command. So we're going to execute that SQL command using the cursor. So we're going to say cursor dot and then the execute method. And then we're in the parentheses following the word execute, we need to plug in the command that we want to run against this database. So in this case, we're going to say that we want to create a table. So that's the operation. We're going to, you'll notice this is not capitalized. So everything that's capitalized should be an indicator that that is part of the SQL syntax. When it's not capitalized, that's something that I'm plugging in that's specific to my project. So I'm going to call this tree specimens. And then I'm going to put in the names of the columns that I want to create in this table. So we're going to create a column called tree ID, and that's going to be a real number. Then we're gonna have a column called species name, that's gonna be a text column. And we're gonna have another column called site name, that's also gonna be a text column. And so we're gonna create that table. The table's gonna be empty after row 5 finishes executing. And then I'm gonna start to insert values into the tree specimens table. So that's what the insert into SQL method is doing. So I'm selecting the table that I'm gonna insert the values into, and I'm defining what those values are. So here we see that we have the tree IDs that I'm plugging in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Species name, Caria illinoinensis, Prunus serratina, Joachim Steingarth. These are the names of trees that are very common in the local area. So those are the species names. And then I'm identifying what site they're at. So what park are they at, or what place are they at in the city? All right, so we have site 1, site 2, site 3. And I'm gonna go ahead and run that code. And just that quickly, we have created a new table and we've plugged in those values into that table. Now, if I want to retrieve information from that table, I'm going to jump down to the code block below, where I'm saying retrieve information from the tree specimens table. So select everything in the tree specimens table, select all from tree specimens where, this is my condition, species name equals Caria illinoinensis, the con tree. And then I'm going to order it by the site that it's found at. So we'll see we get 2 records, tree ID number 1, tree ID number 4, Caria illinoinensis, site 1 and site 2. And then each time I'm reopening my connection to the database, establishing a cursor, and in this case, I'm iterating over the results of the cursor. That's going to allow me to print each of the records that's retrieved, and then I'm closing the connection to the database. We go down to the example below. We're establishing another connection to the database. I'm creating a new table this time called treatments. So treatments to the trees. So we might be spraying it with zinc or spraying it with copper, dealing with nutrient deficiencies or fungus that's growing on the tree, applying fertilizer to make the tree grow faster and make it healthier. So we're creating a new table. We're creating a tree ID column here. So this is important because that's going to be our foreign key, right? Because this isn't information about trees, this is information about treatments, but we're recording information about the tree that it was applied to. That'll allow us to establish the join here in the next step. We're specifying the treatment type. That'll be a text field. What are we doing to the tree? And then we're identifying the date that this action was performed. So with this code block, we are creating the new table. We're adding the new records, and we're using connection.commit to actually apply those changes to the database. And then we're also going to create yet another table called measurements. So maybe when we're going out and we are doing work on these trees, we're also measuring them. That's a separate operation that should have separate information in a different table, because there might be times where we only measure the tree without doing a maintenance operation on it. So we have 2 new tables that we're creating, and here we're plugging in a bunch of values for our measurements of these trees that were added to our database earlier. So we have 3 tables now. Tables about the trees, or a table about the trees, table about the treatments, and a table about the measurements. If we go here, the issue with the code, actually, table measurements are on this. So the way this is set up in this notebook, everything is set to run sequentially. So if you haven't created the table yet, obviously it can't pull information from it. So that was what that warning was about. So make sure you go in order and click all of the play buttons here, or click one all at the top if you want. So now we're selecting all from the measurements, retrieving that information and ordering it by date. And just showing that we can pull information from that other table. The final thing I want to show here as we're wrapping up is how to join the 2 tables together. So this is all leading to this. We again establish our connection, we establish our cursor, and then we're going to execute this join command. So we're going to say for each row in this cursor statement that we're executing, we're going to select the tree specimens tree ID. So this is our primary key. We're going to select tree specimen species name, measurement. So we're listing everything, all of the columns that we want to pull together in this join result. So if we're joining 2 tables, we would pull maybe a few columns from each of them. And you can see if I scan over, we're going to be connecting the tree specimens table to the measurements table. So I want to pull in the diameter of the tree trunk and the date that it was measured. So we're bringing these 2 things together from 2 different tables. And then this is where I'm actually doing the join. So I'm saying this information is being pulled. Sorry. from the tree specimens table. And then I'm gonna do an inner join operation. So there's inner join and outer join. So sometimes you might be joining things where there isn't a one-to-one relationship, and this is going to determine how the SQL interpreter handles that. I'm going to join it to the measurements table based on the tree specimens tree ID equals measurements.tree ID. So here's where I'm linking the primary and the foreign keys. And then specifically, in this case, I only, for instance, want to pull up information about pecan trees, Caria illinoinensis, and I want to order it by the measurements. Wow, that's bad timing. Okay, and if I run it, we'll see there I get my results. And feel free to, if you've made a copy of this, to modify these commands and see if you can get it to change. So here, if I change this to Juggins nigra, so this is a black walnut. There we go. We see we have different values. And you can, order by ascending instead of descending if you want to see how that changes things. There's a lot of experimenting that you can do. And hopefully this helps you understand more about how you can use both Python code and structured query language to interact with the database, both managing it and retrieving records from it. All right, well, I know that was a lot of content. I hope all of these resources are useful. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to take those now.
I would say, I'm not sure if you already have planned out what sessions are happening next semester or not, but if there was any chance of having a session that talks more about the syntax of SQL and constructing more advanced queries, I'd be very interested in a session like that sometime.
Great, yeah, certainly always appreciate feedback on sessions you might be interested in seeing in a future semester. And actually, I'll be sending out a survey in the next week or so to request feedback on our workshops over the last semester. And there will be a specific question: what are you interested in seeing in the future? So we appreciate feedback. Thank you for giving that to me now as well. And that's something I can ask the list.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah, in the chat.
Yeah.
Do tables have to share attributes or columns for them to be under the same database? For example, if I'm running a bank with all types of data, they are eventually conceptually related, but they may not contain the same columns. Do I need multiple databases in that case? And can I connect between databases?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, absolutely. You can certainly have tables within a database that are not, right? So if you are a bank and you are managing information about your customer accounts, that could be one table. You might have another table that has information about your employees or something, right? I mean, in a real world scenario, if you're a real bank, you probably have different databases for those things. But just in this hypothetical example, yes, you certainly could have two tables that have no relation to each other. So again, we've been talking about trees today. If you're a city, maybe you also have information about fire hydrants. There's no connection between fire hydrants and trees, but you could have both of those things in your database, and that would be certainly fine. Yeah. But as in terms of connecting databases, usually you would want everything that's going to be connected to be within a singular database. That's really the idea for being able to establish things like constraints and joins and all of that, is that everything that would be related would be in a single database. But using a programmatic approach like Python, certainly you could probably get creative and pull things together. But that's maybe not the best way to structure the data. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. And thank you all for attending, for joining on.